Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. So for those of us who didn't already know, the current crises make it clear that no one is coming to save us. The people and institutions that we were supposed to believe would have a plan for a time such as this don't have a plan, and in some cases seem to relish in their lack of a plan. For those of us who didn't already know it, we have to save ourselves. We have to see ourselves through this chaos. And since we know that narratives about bootstraps and rugged individualism get us nowhere, that means we have to take care of each other. Today, we have the opportunity to learn from and with 3 people who know a lot about how to do this. They know about mutual aid, about mothering, about how disabled can help each other survive. To help us better understand what it will take to create the care-based world that we need, we have Loira Limbal, Veralucia Mendoza, and Leah Lakshmi Piepzna-Samarasinha. I'm going to offer a sentence or 2 on each of them, and then we can get into the heart of our time together. Veralucia Mendoza is a queer Afro-Indigenous migrant from the deserts of Peru, and one of the main organizers and founders of the mutual aid efforts in Toledo, Ohio. Leah Lakshmi Piepzna-Samarasinha is a queer, disabled femme writer, cultural worker, and educator of Burgher Tamil, Sri Lankan, and Irish Roma ascent. They are the author of many books, including Care Work, Dreaming Disability Justice. And Loira Limbal is an Afro-Latina filmmaker and DJ, interested in the creation of art that is nuanced and revelatory for communities of color. She lives in the Bronx with her 2 children. So first, we'll hear from Leah.
Hi, everybody. I hope people who can hear me can hear. My name is Leah Lakshmi Piepzna-Samarasinha. I'm speaking to you from South Seattle on ceded Duwamish territories. I'm a light brown-skinned person with purple lipstick and brown curly hair on one side of my head and lipsticks with Sylvia Rivera, the original Stonewall warrior, one of many who knew a lot about care. I want to say a special hello to disabled, deaf-blind, mad, neurodiverse, autistic, chronically ill kin. I love us. I love us so much, and we are so needed right now. And I know that all of the disabled ancestors, as my partner reminded me this morning, are with us right now, including especially my heart friend, Stacey Park Milburn. Disabled people invented mutual aid, and we're meeting today. This day is the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act being signed into law. Disabled people got that law by locking down our wheelchairs in front of inaccessible buses, by insisting that we deserved a life outside of locked wards and institutions, by crawling up the front stairs of the United States Capitol. We did not get it just because able-bodied people wanted to be nice to the cripples. We're also meeting at a moment that's in AMC history where 10 years ago, I was present and I was one of the people who helped create the first disability justice track at the AMC 5 years after Black and brown, queer and trans disabled people invented the framework of disability justice. And I was part of a crew called Creating Collective Access, which was a group centering Black and brown, queer disabled folks, including especially Stacey, who said, what would our work at this conference be like if we turned towards each other and showed up for each other and helped each other survive? There is so much that we're present in right now, 10 years later, that I had no idea would be real a decade ago. CCA was one of my first experiences of not being left behind as the able-bodied marched faster and faster and left me with my cane 20 blocks behind. In fact, we took up space in what we called a wild pack of slowness. 10 years later, we're in the triple pandemic times of Corona, and the whole world is grappling with disability and chronic illness. And in a decade, disability justice folks have created so many rich, vibrant, accessible spaces. As Rebecca Coakley says, this is not Oliver, and we're not holding our caps out asking for more. We are making the spaces we need. So I want to lift up that this is both one of the most accessible AMCs ever, and that a lot of people are attending who stopped coming years ago because of access barriers, because it's virtual, And I'm still hearing from so many people who are like, I didn't get my CART, I didn't get my ASL, I didn't get my ESL, I couldn't read the screen because it couldn't zoom up. And I'm not throwing this out there as a call out, but as hopefully an opportunity, because I think that all of us are in a disabled portal time as we birth this next world. And that disabled people have been saying for years that we have the knowledge that all of us need to survive. And that has especially been true in the last 3 years. I'm going to tell a quick story, which is that 10 years ago, Alexis Poingums and the members of the Speak Women of Color Media Collective read a collective poem out loud called The Archaeology of Freedom that Alexis Poingums wrote. And I still hear their voices saying, we are ready now. We are ready now. And last fall, I was talking with Stacy as she was in her kitchen in East Oakland during the wildfires and the Pacific Gas and Electric power shutoffs to all of Northern California that was leaving disabled and elder people vulnerable to dying because they didn't have power for their ventilators, their durable medical equipment, their refrigeration for their insulin. And I was like, and she was, making air filters out of box fans and furnace filters at her kitchen table. And I was like, girl, 10 years ago, did we know this is where we would end up? Are we ready now? And she just laughed and said, I don't know, but we got to get ready. And this is the moment that we're in, where so many of us have been practicing mutual aid for years. Stacy said all the time, no one is coming to save us, but as disabled Black and brown people, we know how to save ourselves. Nobody taught us to do it but ourselves. And we save each other and we refuse to forget each other. And that's something everybody, including newly disabled people, can learn from. And we're in a moment now where the rubber's hitting the road and we're like, okay, do we really know how to do this mutual aid thing? And what I wanted to say when I asked the ancestors and myself and my best self what needed to be said today, I think I see in the past 5 months of COVID, we're in a moment where mutual aid is on so many people's lips, some for almost the first time. And I see some people who are kind of very optimistic and new to it. And they're like, oh, we're just going to love each other. It's going to be great. And I just kind of wince and I go, disabled people know a lot about this stuff. And we know that mutual aid and care is complicated. People are cranky assholes sometimes. Sometimes when we're sick and disabled and poor and Black and brown, you don't have 30 friends you can call on to come bring you groceries because you've been isolated because of racist ableism. There's so much that doesn't make it simple for us to just say what we need because that has not been safe. We've been punished for it. We have not been allowed to have that. Early on in the pandemic, this mutual aid collective was like, oh, do you want to help? Do you want to help drop off groceries? And I was like, I'm immune compromised. I haven't left my house in 2 months. My mutual aid is calling 10 sick and disabled Black and brown people a day and just being like, how you doing? You okay? And just being like, you want to play Candy Crush? I don't play Candy Crush, but just checking in. It's not always glamorous. And I want us to challenge us to get real and stay real and keep asking questions because we don't do anyone any favors by making this out to be simple, this care work. It means really unpacking the legacies of ableism that are in all of us. I want to talk about the ways that Stacy, among many other people, talked about how mutual aid care collectives can be great and they can be a breeding ground for abuse. She was really open in talking about that she needed 15 hours of personal care attendance a day. And she was like, I moved to California because it's a Medicaid expansion state that paid for my attendance. I need community, but I also need people who will always be there for me to get me on the toilet, get me dressed, do all the things that I need to live a full life. And I want to challenge us as we are dreaming these care collectives into being to continue to interrogate that and to be like, let's build out mutual aid. Let's build out community. Let's not idealize community. And let's also think about how we push the state. I mean, Stacy wrote Bernie Sanders' disability justice platform, among other things, which had demands of the state like, let's raise SSDI to 150% at the minimum wage so we're not living on $800 a month anymore. What if there was a CARE Act? What if everybody had a right to care without gatekeeping that question whether we're lying about being disabled or whether we really deserve it? What if that CARE Act included workers' rights for the mostly Black and brown immigrant women and femmes who do care labor and get paid minimum wage? What if we all knew that we had a right to care and it wasn't about being weak or being exposed to abuse? How would that change everything? And really quickly, I'm going to end by, we're going to play one of the last videos that Stacey made before she died. I want people, a lot of folks already know, we as disabled folks have been fighting against what we're calling IC eugenics and care rationing, where those of us who are disabled, elder, fat, Black, brown, are being denied care when there's a shortage of ventilators because some white doctor says, oh, you don't have a good quality of life. Michael Hickson was a 46-year-old Black man with a disability, a father of 5 and a husband who had his ventilator turned off by a doctor who said, oh, we don't actually think he's worth it, against the wishes of his wife in Austin, Texas, just 2 months ago. We need to keep all of our vision and our sight and our witness on this, and we need to join with other disabled people who've been fighting successfully to end care rationing policies. Please play the video.
Thank you, Jessica, and thank you, everyone. It's been pretty scary to navigate COVID-19 as a ventilator user. I was quite frightened early on when my doctor shared that I would likely not survive an exposure. My caregivers who were not able to fully shelter in place have had to step back from working with me. As a disabled person, it felt really critical not to get sick. I saw a public safety alert from Santa Clara County asking people to identify if they use a ventilator for county inventory. I need my ventilator to breathe. My friends and I made emergency plans about what to do if someone shows up at my door asking for my backup ventilator. I was getting advice from friends in medical fields. If disabled people get sick, we may not get care. We may be turned away. We may be discriminated against. This is the key reason why my friends and I, with the Disability Justice Culture Club, started organizing a mutual aid project to support disabled people in the East Bay. We are currently supporting over 100 people with disabilities and staying safe as possible so they do not wind up getting sick and needing to navigate a discriminatory healthcare system. The disability community has a long-standing mistrust of the medical system, yet we have to navigate it every day, especially Black, Indigenous, and people of color whose pain is not taken seriously, not believed, and historically have faced resource and healthcare deprivation. It is well established that Black people in the United States experience more illness, worse healthcare outcomes, and premature death compared to white people. Doctors take an oath to treat all patients equally, yet we know that this is not the case. This is why there has to be checks and balances on hospitals and nursing homes. Otherwise, disabled people, especially people of color, are left alone in a system that already doesn't care about us. Everything that we have right now in terms of community living and appropriate medical care didn't happen by itself. Disability rights advocates and racial justice advocates fought long and hard for it, and will fight long and hard now for people to survive COVID-19 and discrimination. Thank you.
Grateful for Leah, grateful for Stacey's energy that still shows up here. And of course, the legacy of disabled kinfolk to have created these systems of mutual aid that serve all of us, and not just, we were talking about the idea of a romanticized mutual aid, a romanticized community. The reality is that care requires us to move intentionally and to slow down. And in a society where we are used to responding to crisis, that moves us in very urgent ways. Urgency is part of American culture, of what we call America, but we know is Turtle Island. And the reality is that in these moments, we need to slow down so that we shift from a rapid response where we ask disabled folks, would you like to drop off groceries? And we actually center the people that need care. My name is Veralucia, and I come in with some experiences of starting a mutual aid society in Toledo. And I don't want to say started because it has existed for many years without me giving it a name, and without it existing in a virtual space. It has existed beforehand. I learned mutual aid through undocumented immigrants, having been undocumented myself, and as a queer Black and brown person, community was the only thing that allowed us to survive. My parents migrated here from Peru, and for them, reading through USCIS paperwork, which is the offices of for immigration, it wasn't something they did for fun or because somebody paid them either. It was something that they did for survival for their community. So they taught me mutual aid without me knowing the wording, without me knowing that my parents were modeling that. When DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, was something that was passed in 2012, my parents pulled up the website in Spanish, which is another reason why accessibility matters. They read all the forms in Spanish, and they filled them out, mock forms. And by the time you could actually send in the applications, they were ready to go. We were some of the first, my sister and I were some of the first people in our city, Toledo, Ohio, to have DACA available to us. And that was because my parents made a commitment to take care of community. And that wasn't just their own children, that was our neighbors coming over. There was a señora with like the tamales who came over to thank us with that meal for filling out DACA paperwork for her son. People were in and out of our home as my family created this space where they charged no money. All they wanted to see was a commitment from the folks that they were assisting, that they would continue to follow their dreams and live a full life. That was all my parents asked of people. And so they, for me, modeled this reality where we can help each other without needing some sort of not only compensation, but also they didn't say, now you need to go find a job. Now you need to go live this sort of life that was an American dream. They said, go do what you are called to do. Go live what full life means to you. And I am so appreciative that it was undocumented people that raised me, that it was undocumented, churchgoers or parishioners. Although I am not a person that is in that faith anymore, I am grateful for the community meals, for the amount of childcare, the way that it was a holy thing to provide childcare. It wasn't something that was annoying or obnoxious to bring your child along. And we need to think of these realities where the most marginalized are probably not going to jump on our mutual aid train and say, yes, I can also deliver meals, because they're honestly the ones that need the meals delivered. And that doesn't make them any less part of the movement. As a matter of fact, political engagement is only possible through accessible organizing. If our organizing is not centering the folks that need this protection and care, then we're never going to get to that space of political engagement that we aspire to, or that some people dream of when we talk about for example, socialist systems. The reality is that Indigenous people, Black and Brown people, queer people, disabled folks, undocumented folks, and everybody else that has been told that their livelihood is less important, we have been taking care of each other. We have been creating these systems for decades. And it's not so much that now we're jumping up to say mutual aid, and now it's an exciting new concept because it's not new, but rather it's that you need to jump in and see what we have been doing. We're seeing a lot of folks, primarily in the younger white spaces, where it's sort of like we're going to love each other and it's going to be kumbaya. And the reality is that sometimes, like Leah said, I'm going to be cranky, and sometimes I'm going to be not fun to deal with when I have lupus fog bothering me. I'm not going to be fun to deal with when I need you to help hold me up when I'm having a lupus flare. And that I can't go do your grocery delivery, and I can't go sit outside with you because I'm photosensitive. I can't go sit out in the sun with our guitars, where we all, just sing at each other. That's not the reality of how I live, and that's not the reality of how many people live. And undocumented immigrants to this day continue to create communities that are so tightly knit that we continue to share our realities. And sometimes people ask, where is this community? They're taking care of each other. They don't want you to see them unless you are part of that community. And this is very intentional. And that means that it is working because they are hiding from ICE and other violent forms of policing that the state continuously pushes on us simply for moving through borders that in reality are illegitimate. So when we're talking about mutual aid, let's remember that it's not dancing through fields, but rather that we're there for the really disgusting moments when I accidentally have a bodily function that somebody has to clean up because I don't have the energy for. And that's the reality of being both disabled, being undocumented, or when I need a ride because I can't drive because I'm undocumented. And that means several rides to several things. It's not just a one-time thing that you feel good about and you get a badge for. So the reality is that when we talk about caring for our future, we already have people that have been pulling in the future every single day. And the question is, when is everyone else going to catch up?
Wow, I'm sitting here with chills. Thank you so much, Leah and Veralucia, for your generosity of spirit and all that you've shared. Hello, everyone. My name is Loira Limbal. As Dani mentioned at the top, I am a DJ and a filmmaker. I recently completed a film called Through the Night, which is actually screening tonight as part of the Detroit Narrative Agency's program, Ethics and Aesthetics. That's happening at 7 p.m. tonight. And I am joining y'all from the Bronx, New York, land of the Lenape people. I'm actually going to start by sharing a short story with you all. This is something I've only shared once before in public, and I went back and forth about whether or not to do it, but it felt like the right place to start. So when I was 9 years old, my sister Glomedy was born. Shortly after her birth, my mother had to return to work to support us. She was a single mom. Babysitters would cancel, family would flake. My mother was a home health aide who worked the night shift. It was not the kind of job where she had any real paid time off. And it was not the type of job where she could call out sick last minute. And so she was often forced to make the impossible decision of leaving me, her 9-year-old, home alone to take care of my infant sister. And you should know my mother was an amazing mother. She was devoted and hardworking and loving. She was a great mother. She just didn't have many options. 30 years later, very little has changed in this country. We still ask poor, Black and brown working class folks who mother to make impossible decisions every day. And then we turn around and judge them and weigh them down with the stigma of being a bad mother when anything goes wrong. The irony, of course, is that today we call many of these people essential workers. But if we're honest, we're not treating them as essential. We've made them sacrificial. So Through the Night is a love letter to caregivers, to single mothers, and all of those who mother. It is a love letter to those who have always been essential. Can we please play the trailer?
Come on, Mama, time to get up. Morning, baby. Come on. All right. Noah. Time to get up, Noah. I've been doing this for 22 years. I have all different types of families in my daycare. I have some that comes in at 6 o'clock in the morning that works to 8:30 at night. I have some that comes from 3:30 to 12:30 at night. I have some that comes in overnight. I see a lot of parents come in and break down. They don't want to do this, but they need to go out and work and pay their bills and take care of their family.
All right, I'll see you later.
All right, baby, have a good day. Be careful. This is the way the world is set up at this point.
I work on the night shift in a pediatric emergency room from 7 p.m. to 7:30 a.m. I never really thought of overnight childcare till I had to use it.
What?
I've been working 7 days for almost 2 months. If I'm not working one job, I'm working another job. So I'm always working and working. Hi, Mary. Nuna's like my other mom. She helped me a lot. People used to have kids.
You know I have a house full of kids. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Love you guys very much.
Bye-bye.
I see you Monday. I have a Diana, but I don't think you're her bus. Chase, my grandson, yes.
Your grandson.
My grandson, I didn't know he was going to be on the bus today. Yes, yes, that's mine. It's not just a job. This is really our life. My whole family has to be involved. My children, ever since they was the age of 2 years old, they had to share me with other children. I remember my children saying, Mommy, why do they have to come first?
Mommy!
As parents, you make sacrifices. It's not their fault that I work the way that I work, so I just do what I can. It's not easy, but eventually I'll sleep.
Do we love each other?
Yeah.
I didn't hear you.
Yeah.
Do we love each other?
Yeah.
I'm a daycare provider, so I'm constantly picking up babies.
Then you have to be careful. If you continue to have numbness, you need surgery.
This work is hard. I don't want to stop doing what I'm doing because I feel like if I lay down, I'm so tired I might not get back up.
I want to send all my love and gratitude to the folks who you saw in the trailer, Nunu, Patrick, Marisol, and Shanona. They allowed me, our crew, our team into their homes and really agreed to join us on what now is a 4-year journey of telling the story together. I made this film to lift up their stories, the stories of the women in my community, because we deserve stories about our lives that do not reduce us to victims or heroes. We deserve stories that dwell in our everyday, that allow us to stop, behold, and fully contemplate our lived experience. Both the everyday violence that we experience, but also the everyday acts of radical care that, as Leah and Veralucia have mentioned, have ensured that our communities are still here, despite the ongoing attempts to wipe us off the face of this earth. I want to talk a little bit about the everyday violence piece. There's the everyday violence that we experience, like Marisol, who has to work multiple jobs that make ends meet and still can barely make ends meet. That how is it okay that we have a society where people are working 2 to 3 jobs and can't pay their rent, or have to choose between paying rent and putting food on the table? How is this okay? We have normalized this. Or the violence that Shanona and Nunu experience, where sleep is not accessible to them. Sleep. It's tantamount to torture. I've heard people talk about sleep deprivation and torture tactics and techniques, and that's what we're doing to folks in this country. Shanona works the night shift. You heard her say that eventually she'll sleep one day, but also Nunu and Patrick, who are caring for their children and providing, the support that so many families in our communities need. They can't get sleep either. They sleep 2, 3, 4 hours a night, if that. To this idea also that both Leah and Veralucia referenced around not idealizing what care is and not romanticizing what the actual needs are. So when we're talking about we will save each other, we will care for each other, let's be real about what that means and what that entails, right? And it's the everyday violence that Black and brown women and femmes experience navigating all spaces in our society, right? It's Shaija Washington, who was killed a few weeks ago here in New York during childbirth at Woodhull Hospital, whose case got very little coverage, very little attention, right, as is common, right? Or it's the single mother in Alabama who was recently sentenced to 496 days behind bars for failing to pay traffic tickets. Her children were then thrown into the foster care system where they were harmed. Both of her children were harmed. There are so many forms of violence that Black and brown mothers, single mothers, experience on a daily basis that are invisibilized and erased, and none of us center in our work or in our conversations. And that needs to change. The sort of flip side to the violence is that because we have to navigate virtually every institution of the state, not only on behalf of ourselves, but on behalf of those that we care for, we are also experts, right? There's this expertise that we have that comes from mothering, from this very specific and sacred kind of labor and work that we do, that we also need to lift up and recognize, as expertise, and center, and look to caregivers and mothers in our community as leaders, look to their leadership. As Sadia Hartman brilliantly said, care is the antidote to violence. And we are experts in that. And I think the work of mothering is almost, I see it, and I'm, again, not romanticizing or idealizing anything, right? Like I'm talking about mothering as work that is done from a place of love, but we certainly are flawed. Plenty of people are harmed by their mothers, right? This is not a kind of perfect, idyllic, sort of state or peace. But I found in my experience that even folks who have to break ties with their biological families or biological mothers eventually find someone else who will mother them. They will come across a Black or brown femme at some point in their life who will mother them, right? And so this is my insistence on centering mothering as this very kind of particular site of possibility, of resistance, of vision, right? That really blows the limitations of the nuclear family and of that rugged individualism that we get taught out of the water. These are not, those values have not been the things that have kept us alive, and they certainly will not ensure that we continue to move forward. And so I also think, my last 2 points that I'd like to make is I want to encourage us to think about what it would look like to put more energy into the work and the spaces and the people that care for us, that literally take care of us on a daily basis. I think in movement spaces, we still very much center certain forms of labor as resistance and idealize that. So we are all enthralled by the fight, but I'm interested in what it could look like if we were equally enthralled by the nurturing or by the caregiving or the care, because I actually think that the lessons of how to care for each other, of what self-determination could look like, of building the future that we want, that already exists in the work that is being done. That exists in the daycare center that Nuno and Patrick run. There is nothing more complicated than love, right? Love is a really complex human emotion. So can we lean into love, and follow the leadership of those who care for us with love? I think there's a real possibility there to strengthen our movements if we do that, because to mother when you are Black, poor, queer, trans, immigrant, indigenous, disabled, or undocumented is to insist on the value of our lives in a society that tells us that we are worthless. So my invitation is for us to center the radical imagination of those who hold our communities down on a daily basis.
So much richness there. Thank you to each of you. So for those of you who are with us, now is a good time to post any questions that you have to in the chats in Facebook or YouTube, because we're going to open it up for your questions in just a little bit. But first, I get to talk with these folks. Now, you all know that I sent you some questions that we can use, and also there's so much here, and I want this to be a discussion, so you can be like, that's cool, and let's pivot, because I want to speak directly to something Veralucia said or whatever, just let's have a conversation. But I want to continue on what Loira was just talking about in terms of I really love this idea of we're all enamored, we all kind of romanticize the fight, right? But we don't pay enough attention to the nurturing and this idea of the real political power of love. And there's a line in Leah's book, Care Work. You write, when we reach for each other and make the most access possible, it is a radical act of love. When access is centralized at the beginning dream of every action or event, this is radical love. And I was just really taken by the way that you write about love in that part of your book. Can you just talk a little bit more about this? What role does love play in care?
Oh yeah, I could talk about this all day. I'm so glad you love that quote. Yeah, when I wrote that right around the time of the first Creating Collective Access. And for me, what I was speaking to was it was coming from a place of really being bowled over by being in a space that was all disabled, Black and brown folks, majority, and that we were like, okay, we're not going to be like, oh, please, can you help me, to some, able-bodied person someplace else. We're going to turn towards each other, and we're going to love each other. And that's both really radical, because one of, in Crip Camp, Corbett O'Toole says that as disabled people, we live in a society, we live every day knowing we're in a society that wants us dead. And that's just straight up facts. And part of it is that we're not taught to love ourselves. We're taught to squish ourselves flat, minimize our disability, be grateful, all of this kind of thing, and really just pass as much as possible as non-disabled. So, and there's so many people I know with very different experiences of disability who are like, oh yeah, I'm going to survive by being the only one, the one that's cool. So it was really deep. And I've done that. I've been like, oh, I'll just minimize this cane. Don't worry about it. I'll take care of my stuff. That's boring. So it was really deep to be in a space where, as, different kinds of disabled people, we were like, let's turn towards each other. We want to be here, with other disabled people. And that's really powerful. And also what it unlocked really quickly is that, like Vera and Loira both said, it's complicated. It's not just like, oh, we love each other, great. It's like, when you've been taught to hate yourself and then you are with other people who are like you, you have to unlearn hating each other. And you have to unlearn all kinds of internalized depression. And also just not assume that just because we're all disabled, we know each other's care needs. And those aren't skills that we're taught. But there's skills that I've been so lucky to be in disability justice community where I see us learning it and practicing when we screw up, apologizing, and practicing learning about being in solidarity with each other. So I ask for access needs that I don't have, because it's all of us or none. And I've had to learn stuff like that. So I'd say that. And the last thing I'll say is that I think I also was speaking to something that I've seen a lot, I've witnessed a lot in able-bodied activist spaces, is when people think about access or disability, it's an afterthought, and it's kind of like we got to go through this checklist, so we don't get sued. And it's not real, like it's better than nothing, but it's not coming from actually having authentic relationships with disabled people and communities and really valuing us, not in spite of who we are, but for who we are. And I can feel the difference when I'm in a space. It could be the most radical pants place in the world, or it could just be like, my auntie on the corner who just gets it and is like, oh, you need a chair? Come here, honey. And where it's actually about giving a shit instead of like, okay, well, we did this, it's ADA compliant. So how come those people aren't coming, right? Because love is also about shifting power, right? So when it's checklist, it doesn't ensure that as disabled Black and brown people, we have power. Because when we're in power, as my friend Roman once said, everything's going to change when disabled people have power. Everything looks and feels different. So that's my 16 cents on that.
So powerful. Thank you. Does anybody else want to speak to that? If there's something bubbling up in you, I don't want to pivot. Okay, we can come back if you're moved to speak to love.
I do. I was taking in Leah's words and listening, and then thinking about what it was bringing up in me. That question of love and power is something that I think about often, and that I think it's something that comes up in my parenting, my mothering, quite often, because I was actually thinking about this morning. My children are 7 and 9, and they have a lot of words. So they make lots of observations about everything. And they tell me about myself a lot, more than I care for. If I'm on, just to be real, like sometimes I'm like, yo, can you not go there right now? I'm not ready for this. But something that I've learned, or a muscle that I'm constantly working on in my communication with them, is that when they raise a need, or a concern, is really just listening to them without turning it into something that's about me. right? So they're raising something that perhaps I've done that has caused them harm or that causes them anxiety or whatever the case might be. And I think about love, the kind of the call of love is to like fully behold this person that is in front of you, right? Regardless of age or body or, any number of other things, without making it about me first, And so I think that there's this piece, that's critical to care, that is about listening, right? And that is about power and the kind of a power shift in saying, you are saying something. So I'm just going to stop, just something that Veralucia said at the top, that like care requires us to slow down, which is so, I'm in New York City, I'm a New Yorker. So, for me, slowing down is hard, but these are the things that I'm having to like learn in my parenting. And so, there are these ways in which this work that we do on a daily basis, again, make us in some ways, give us all these muscles that then I am able to apply, when I'm interacting with adults as well, right? Like it's like in doing and having that exercise with my child of saying like, I'm just going to fully listen to you before I think about how to defend myself, right? You're telling me you have a need. You're telling me you have a concern. You're telling me I've caused harm. I'm just going to listen. I don't have to respond right away. I don't have to fix it right away. I'm going to listen. And that is respecting you. And that is about shifting power in this relationship. And ultimately, I need to do that in order to care for you, which is my job. It is my responsibility as your mother. And these are lessons and muscles that I think translate really well and are really necessary in movement work. So when we talk about the kind of the expertise that comes from the lived experiences of all the communities that we've lifted up here collectively today, those are the kinds of things that I'm talking about, which are intimate, they're small, they're everyday, it's not grandiose. It's not the stuff that's going to happen on the front line of a protest, but it is the stuff that's going to keep us alive,
That's right. One of the things that keeps coming up is this question of where does the state fit into all this? And how do we show up for each other without letting the state off the hook? Because in most cases, we're paying them to do the work that they are abdicating responsibility for. So I wonder, I don't know, maybe Veralucia, would you like to speak to this? Because I'm like curious, in Toledo, you're helping lead this mutual aid work, and how does that work alongside, alongside the state, or are you like making demands of the state, like while you're also making sure people's needs are met? What's the relationship?
So we are not working alongside the state. And the reason that is because the state refuses to listen to people that actually need care, right? We have people coming to us and actually agencies referring people to us, the mutual aid group, if you will, saying, I have a client that doesn't meet these requirements for our grant, therefore I can't help them. Can Mutual Aid Toledo help them? So we have all these agencies in Toledo that have grants, that have names, that have funding, and absolutely no agency really in being able to help real people with real needs in Toledo. And this is not a call out to the organizations themselves directly, but rather their board members and their leadership. And also the founders that are creating these, giving these grants that in reality are about outcomes and not about who is actually on the ground. And this is a call out to the city of Toledo and the state of Ohio. We have a homelessness board that does very little when we actually have people on the street. We have a foster system that continuously causes harm, like what Loira was saying. So in mutual aid has been seen with this reality of I can't believe that these organizations have to reach out to us because they are created in such a way that are hierarchies and there's just no real either analysis or relationship with people even in their neighborhood. They can't even go on a walk in the neighborhoods that like their buildings are in and understand what the people around them have needs for. So in that sense, we are advocating for more, but what we're seeing is that responding to care right now has been rapid response. So again, it's that urgency, and it's staying in that cycle of urgency doesn't allow you to stop and maybe advocate for other things in other places. And it's designed that way, right? If you keep us in this loop of exhaustion, I don't have time to work toward changing the realities for real tangible change here. So Toledo is facing this, and I'm sure many, many cities throughout the country are facing this reality.
So does anybody else want to speak to that question of like the relationship to the state or lack thereof?
I would. I think in the context of the needs of mothers and working mothers and childcare, there's certainly demands being made of the state because as we're seeing right now, it's just wild, you know. Essential workers are keeping things, you know, moving, our society open, if you will, during this pandemic, but not being provided any kind of care support. And I'll move beyond the pandemic moment. Like I said, you know, this was my mother's experience when I was 9 years old, you know, having to leave a 9-year-old home with an infant because you can't call out last minute and you can't afford to lose a job, you know. That these are the kinds of choices that we are forcing people to make, you know, is completely unconscionable and unacceptable. And that needs to change because, you know, for so many of, you know, tax dollars do go to the state. And so, yes, demands need to be made because it's also unfair, you know, to ask Nunu and Patrick to shoulder the burden that is really a collective responsibility. It's a societal responsibility, right? So we're asking two human beings who are amazing, you know, no doubt. They're amazing people. And I feel like I joke that Nunu is like the oracle. And that's wonderful. And I celebrate her and I honor her and her work and her knowledge and her wisdom. But it's also like we can't get comfortable in that. You know, that's not the solution. The needs of our families are far outstrip what individual folks can do. Even when we organize ourselves in collectives, you know, also to what Leah was saying, you know, when you have someone that does need round the clock care, you know, it's unreasonable to think that we can provide for all the needs of our folks. I think it's a both and. I think that the key for me is, you know, I look at Nunu and Patrick, they're part of a first of its kind union of home-based daycare centers. And I'm like, they're the ones that need to be in leadership because they're the ones that actually really intimately understand what the needs are and how to provide for those needs. You know, the folks who are writing policy and in conversations with policymakers oftentimes don't have a clue. You know, recently Nuno and I were in an interview together, and she mentioned the situation, for example, of like folks who can't get they're working, right? So they can't get unemployment, but their employers have cut them down to 3 days a week. So, or to 4 days, I forget which one it is, but you know, it's like all these like gaps and loopholes and ways that this machinery is like crushing our folks. like the only people that know exactly what's happening are the people that are impacted directly by these things. And so they need to be in leadership. It's not some policymaker, some elected official, somewhere off in Washington. They don't have a clue. And so everything that they design always falls short. So I think it's a both and. We provide for each other. We provide care for ourselves. We save us. Our movements need to center that wisdom, but also they're the leaders, so they also need to be informing the demands that get made, of the state and so on and so forth.
Yeah, this is Leah. I'll just triple the both and, because, on the one hand, there's policy demands and wins that disabled communities have fought for that are really important and that, materially change people's lives. Like in Washington State, actually, no, sorry, in Seattle, because we're a Fight for 15 city, care attendants that are paid for through DCFS, Department of Health and Family Services, just got to $15 an hour in the past year. Now, and that's still not enough, but it's a lot better than when it was $11 an hour, which is terrible for the workers. And then when you are trying to access that care and people don't want to work a job for $11. So it's just bad for everybody. Disabled people, elders get abused, people who are the workers have really crappy working conditions that in COVID, but period, they feel like they can't call out when they're sick because they're like, I can't lose that money because it's so little. Right. So, I think about stuff like that. I do think about in places where there is, socialized medicine or guaranteed annual income, guaranteed basic income or other things which are possible. Or that moment when the Sanders campaign was like, yeah, if we win, we want to give people an SSDI $2,000 a month, not $800. And I was like, so many of my friends, that would change their lives. They've been living on $7.95 for years, right? It's unconscionable. It's unconscionable. You know what I'm trying to say. And then at the same time, like Vera said, there's all these people. That's part of why disability justice got invented, which is Patty Byrne, who's one of the founders of disability justice, queer, Haitian, Japanese, wheelchair using, femme, co-creator of Sins Invalid. She was like, we're living in the cliffhangers of the disability rights movement because there are so many of us. We're not saying screw the ADA, but there's so many of us, because we're undocumented, because we're sex workers, because we're poor, who will never be able to sue an inaccessible, location, right? So that's when community steps in, as it always has. And what I see, neither is enough, but sometimes when people are new to disability community, or they're like, oh, well, don't you want to go to an agency? And I was like, no, I'm on the sick and disabled queer group and we're all just mailing each other extra inhalers and being like, okay, here's what you say to the rheumatologist and here's what worked for me. And fundraising accessible vans for each other and stuff like that. And it's all imperfect, but I think it's just really important for us to continually look at where do we build power? What's going to get us to our goals? What's going to give us something back? And what's going to feel like knocking on a door that's never going to answer? And just to keep demanding more for care workers than crumbs, basically. Also, my cats are really cute. They might make a cameo at some point.
So just to remind you that, oh, go ahead, Loira.
I was going to say, I wanted to say something that got prompted by the demanding more than crumbs. That speaks to me because for me, it's like, I want Shanona and Marisol to be able to rest. I want them to sleep, I want Nuno and Patrick to be able to go on vacations, Like, we deserve so much more,
Same. I want my dad to go on vacation and not just days off. I want him to go where he wants to go. My mom is a full-time caretaker of my grandmother. She left for Peru about 4 years ago as an undocumented immigrant, knowing she couldn't come back without many hurdles, but she will come back through the power of community. She's a full-time caretaker. That's all she does. And my family sends money for her, financial needs, but 100% of her time is dedicated to my grandmother. That is where the state is failing us all around, separating families, creating these borders. Where grandma could have maybe been brought here, but then she wouldn't have had access, for example, to Medicaid, because of a legality thing that is so ambiguous and so made up. So I want my parents, or this, same thing. I want them to sleep not out of exhaustion. I want them to sleep out of those cozy days when you've just been so calm that you just take this wonderful nap. That's what I want for them. And that's not so much to ask for.
Can I say one more thing?
Yep, and then we're going to go into Q&A, yeah.
Stacey invented this term crip doula, where she was like, "What? Those are the people where when you get disabled or you get more disabled, they're like, here's how you drive a wheelchair. Here's how you get food stamps. Here's how you adjust to fatigue." When I was blowing my knees out last year and I was like, I might start being a chair user, she was like, "Welcome, I'll show you how to do it." And she was like, so many people fear disability for really good reasons because ableism is terrifying, right? What if instead in this world we had just this term of like, yeah, don't worry, it's okay, come on in. There's going to be people who can help you and you're going to have time. And if you can only work 20 hours a week, no problem. You're going to get money. I bring up Ursula Le Guin's book, The Dispossessed, a lot, which is an anarchist non-utopia, where it's just a future where it's horizontal. You walk in, you want clothes, you pick them up off the shelf. You're sick, you go to the hospital. You open any door of the dormitory, you have a room. It's just, and it's like everyone has that right. That's within our reach. We don't have to settle. We can't continue to settle for what is killing us.
Just a reminder that if you have questions, you can post that in the chat on Facebook or YouTube. So first, let's see, Loira, can we get the name or some information about the Union of Home Care Workers that you mentioned?
Yeah, I'll look it up right now because it's long, so I don't want to mess it up.
And while that's happening, can the panel speak to care across generation? So what does it mean to straddle care for children and care for elders or elder or disabled parents? The U.S. culture and structures are in tension with my Caribbean childhood memory of community care. How do we care across generations?
I'm still looking it up, but I do want to say that because it's something I think about often. There's some folks that talk about being kind of in the middle, right? Like where you're caregiving for a child or you're caring for a sick family member who's an adult or an elder in your life. And so there's kind of caregiving across ages and across needs and the spectrum of caregiving and what that does to the caregiver, the demands of that. And in this COVID moment, so many people, so as everyone knows, New York City, we were like crushed by COVID-19. My mother had COVID-19, was really sick, had to be hospitalized. She made it. She kicked COVID's ass, thankfully. But the day that I realized that I had to take her to the emergency room was literally my son's 9th birthday. And if I'm honest, I think I haven't still fully processed what it was like to face my greatest fear, which was, my mother's mortality, which was really at my doorstep. And I remember between running around trying to figure out how to get cupcakes and how to do the Zoom call from my son, crying in the bathroom or going outside to cry for 5 minutes, gathering myself, coming back inside, and kind of navigating that. If I'm honest, I don't think I still haven't fully processed that moment, in the same ways that I think we haven't had a space or a chance to fully process the grief, the collective grief that we are experiencing. You know, in my community, we lost like about 5 people, you know, people directly in my community and my life to COVID-19. And I know this is a bit of a tangent, but it brought it up for me because I felt like on April 5th, 2020, I had to celebrate my 9-year-old's birthday, and my approach that day was to not say anything to kids because they couldn't do anything. And so why give them information that they didn't have, that would make them anxious, right? And destabilize them, that they ultimately have no sort of agency to do anything over. So my choice was to kind of keep it from them while then trying to figure out where I was going to take my mother, because hospitals were like wild, you know, wildly over capacity everywhere, how to get her there, all those things, right? And just that conundrum that plays out for people who are caring for different generations or different sets of needs, you know, on all sides. Again, to this point of it being unfair that burden falls or that responsibility falls on individuals because care is not widely accessible, you know, in our communities. Oh, and one more thing, because she mentioned, the person mentioned their Caribbean kind of heritage being in conflict. I think the other piece that I've been sitting with is that whether it's from like our home cultures or whether it's like stuff that we learn in the US, we have bought into this idea that we are supposed to be able to do it ourselves, right? Like that rugged individualism has seeped in. And so whether it's you're supposed to care for yourself and your immediate family by yourself, or you're supposed to take care of your elders or the sick folks in your family or the disabled folks in your community by yourself, like we really do put that pressure on us, particularly as Black and brown femmes. And I think it's something that does come from both US culture, but also from our home cultures, right? That this idea that these are things that we're supposed to be able to do on our own, which I think we need to problematize, because then it makes it so that even if care, support, and help is a possibility, we sometimes are not able to take it, because also receiving care and support requires a level of vulnerability, right? It requires like letting others see you, which is a hard thing, you know? And so, you know, that Caribbean piece, I'm like, I know that Caribbean thing. So let me say something about that.
Similar in South America, no, in Sudamerica, there's that same reality where we take care of our elders, and we're very proud of that. But there's always the assumption that a woman will do it. So if a mother has a son and a daughter, it is a daughter's responsibility. And again, this is an assumed, unspoken rule, but I see it play out. I'm seeing it play out with my own mom, as she cares for my grandma. And yeah, there is this rugged individualism that it's just not sustainable. And again, it's that same normative, patriarchal, able-bodied type of thing that I'm so grandiose, I can take care of all the things. And that's just not the reality of who we are. As people, no single person can take care of all the things. And I think the question also asks how we balance that. And I myself am not a parent, so I can't speak to that. But the thought of caring for my parents is also something that brings me pride, but something that I want to be realistic about in how I move forward with that as the years come, as they will. I can't stop the passage of, and, you know, in the aging process. I welcome it. But I'm also thinking of, it's okay to have help, both, if state workers, like as we were talking about, the state should be taking care of these things. And if not, how do we create systems where we support as well? Or for example, I would want someone to be paid well if they were to help me caring for my parent, right? And that's something that we can demand of our state, and also something that we can create as a collective.
I want to add two things. Something that I just said reminded me, sometimes I do a lot of workshops around care and care collectives, and occasionally there'll be somebody who, usually is a person of color, who is like, well, back in the day before colonization, we just cared for each other, right? And it was so beautiful. And I'm like, back in the day, sometimes you were the queer kid who was disabled, who couldn't be queer, because you were, the aunties are going to take care of you, don't worry. So I think that we need to put that in the mix too. I think it's really important, like everyone has said, not to, again, like just kind of utopize these ideas of like, the family will take care of you. It's like the family can be the site of so much violence and exploitation. Right? Everything can be, the state can be too. But what about if we start dreaming lots of different models for collective support where, especially as like disabled and elder people, we get to still have autonomy and control over our lives and not just feel like we're in this. So often people feel like, my choices are either to insist that I'm independent, I don't need any help if I'm going to maintain control over my life, or I'm going to be dependent. And that's the worst thing because I'm vulnerable to being abused and to losing choices, right? I also I was like, there's a statistic I pull up a lot and I was looking for it. It's about the worth of unpaid care labor. And it's like billions of dollars, but there's a new one that from the UN that says globally unpaid care in domestic labor is worth between 10 and 39% of the global gross domestic product. Right? And that's not counting badly paid care labor or underground care labor, right? So like these white men pushing a button somewhere and getting millions of dollars a second, like who cares? It's everybody who's cooking, cleaning, getting water, wiping butts, changing diapers, like doing all, nursing, sex work, all kinds of things, mothering, parenting. And the last thing I'll say is I'm also not a biological parent, but I do live in intergenerational queer community. And I just want to say something that I keep witnessing happening in queer communities is it's like every 2 years, people be like, where are the queer elders? Where are they? And I'm like, they're disabled. They stopped being able to go to the club because the club doesn't have a place to sit down. Like they had to move back in with their family because they got broke and the neighborhood gentrified. And similar to what everybody's been saying about care means slowing down, I mean, I value the queer elders in my life, and there's a bridge between them and me at 45 because I too like to sit. And we get to just like be ordinary nobodies who get to just be like old farts on a bench talking about life. And there's power in that. Like Vera, I really appreciate it. I mean, I feel like both Loira and Vera talked about, we've all been talking about invisibilized labor, how care is so invisibilized. And there's oppression in that, but there's also power in like, what can we sneak in? Sometimes I think about, what if there was a care strike, okay, which people have talked about over the years. The, Black women strike for housework in the UK was a thing. In the same article I'm looking at, I don't know much about it, but in Uruguay, they passed a care act. They actually did in the past couple of years where they're like, care is a human right. It's a human right. And it's a right that comes with dignity and being treated with respect for the worker and the person receiving care. And it just actually says right here, I'm crying. It's like mothers, children, disabled people, and elders have a federal right to care. Okay, don't dream it, be it. I just quoted the Rocky Horror Picture Show. I'm sorry. Anyway, I'm going to stop talking now.
It fits. It was the quote we needed. Talk about the radical imagination, right? It's the same thing.
It's really appreciative of, I too like to sit. Yes. Just a moment.
What are steps that we can take to help mutual aid programs continue beyond this pandemic? How can we make this happen as a community rather than a few leaders taking the brunt of the organizing work? Whoever would like to jump in, feel you are welcome.
There's a kitty. Leah, if you'd like to speak to this, I feel like there's some important aspects you brought up earlier that could.
I mean, I think both of you have spoken about, and Vera, you were talking about with the mutual aid that you've seen, there was this like fast, rapid response, go, go, go. And, I just finished writing a piece called Cripping the Resistance, because I was here in Seattle looking at, people took over 10 blocks of downtown. It was great. And I was like, cool, I feel like the revolution's happening and I'm missing it. And we all so many of us are missing it because I can't be with 10,000 people with no masks or not a lot of masks. Like I can't get sick. And something that, a bunch, I've been talking with different disabled folks in, Seattle and elsewhere. And, my really good friend, Cyrus Marcus Ware, who's a Black disabled trans man and organizer in Toronto, he just said, we need to tell them there is no revolution without us. And this revolution is not going to take place in like 10 days of speedball action in the streets. Like it's about pacing. Like the butts are going to be needing to be wiped and the food's going to need to be delivered for a long time. So I'm really interested in continuing to have conversations about how do we build alternative structures that sure are responding quickly to things when need be, because I think Slims as disabled people, we do things slowly, and Slims, we know how to be like, I've got one spoon today, I'm going to knock this out, But I think about people who I'm talking to who are like, we're organizing food distribution systems that will last for the long haul, right? Like, and like, I'm thinking about the people, shout out to Hygiene Hustle in North Seattle, a collective of sex workers up on the Aurora Strip who were like, shoot, nobody working the street can get hand sanitizer, took over a vape factory to make their own hand sanitizer. And they're like, we're going to keep doing this. We're not going to be like, oh, there's one bottle Purell for $400. They're like, we're going to make this happen. I want to think about stuff like that, and about economies of care and about like also sustainability where it's not on three leaders, who look and act a certain way to do everything and then they burn out. But, one of the key principles of disability justice is as disabled people, we've often been told, oh, you can't do anything. Look at you, but we're all like, actually, we all can do something. Right. And if we all can do something and if movements change so that it's not about meetings at 7 p.m. where parents are putting their kids to bed that go till midnight where I'm like, I need to be in bed, but where it's like, oh, you can drop in your one spoon. Oh, you can go charm the people into donating food. You can fill up my friend's extra manual wheelchair with the sandwiches. Then we all get something out of it. Right. So anyway, the too long didn't read is just like long haul. Long haul, and really being, and also asking, how do we build in so people can be like, great, I'm going to take a break from this unpaid organizing. Someone else can step up to have those skills and take over, which also means reaching out to people who have been told, oh, you're not a real leader, and really making room for people who are new and aren't experts and didn't go to like Oberlin College or whatever, and being like, you already know how to do this. So let me bring you in, let me support you in that leadership.
A whole word. I think in this moment too, part of it in terms of making this viable and sustainable long term is an exercise in imagination. And so we have to continue feeding our imaginations around what is possible. There are these conversations that have become like viable, on a national level that I honestly never thought I would see happen in my lifetime. For us to be having as of a dynamic conversation as we are about abolition. And again, like I'm a realist. I'm not romanticizing anything, but like that so many people have this word and this idea, this concept, in their mouths. Whether, they understand it fully or don't or whatever, like just that alone to me feels like this radical possibility that I did not imagine would happen in my lifetime. And so for me, I think it's about like continuing to feed that sense of the possibility so that we don't just kind of fall back into what we've always known. We don't fall back into accepting what we've always known, the familiar. You know, a good friend of mine posted on Facebook one day kind of a comparison of the response to COVID-19 in Senegal and like a handful of other African countries versus the US and Brazil. And she had some amazing poetic analysis that I'm not going to do justice to, but part of her kind of main point was that COVID-19 is not asking us to do the impossible. It's showing us what is possible, right? And so if we can continue to feed and nurture our imagination around that, I think that's a key area of like pouring into imagination so that we can sustain, right, these possibilities longer term. I think that's part of it. I think the other piece to Leah's point about, and it's also connected to imagination, like we have to rethink who we see as leaders, you know, who we center, who we care about. I say this again to bring my mother in. Clearly, my mother is like everything to me because I keep bringing her into everything, but she had her experience with COVID-19. She leaves the emergency. She had a terrible experience in the first emergency room and left at 3:30 in the morning without getting her results because she couldn't take it anymore. And then I had to take her somewhere else where she was, you know, finally admitted and cared for, and you know, she made her recovery. But so she leaves that first emergency room, and her conclusion to me was, you know, this country uses you and then discards you as if you're trash, as if you're garbage, right? Then fast forward to the uprising. My two younger sisters were arrested here in the Bronx in what many people agree was one of the most kind of violent responses that New York City Police Department deployed on protesters during, you know, the kind of days of high activity. So I called my mother to tell her, Mommy, the girls have been arrested. This is what happened. I'm on it. We're doing jail support. We're going to take care of them. They're going to be fine. Everybody's going to be fine. My mother's like, you know, first is like her blood pressure shoots up, but then her second kind of thought was, well, we've come too far to turn back now, right? And that's what they want. They want to intimidate us, you know? And so I share all this to say that then she takes it upon herself. I like call her every day. I'm checking in on her. So what'd you do today? Oh, today I went and I talked to, you know, the homeboys that are standing always on that corner in front of that bodega. I went and talked to them about what's going on, you know, just because I wanted to hear. And then the next day she like talked to like all the viejitos, you know, all the elders. So she's like talking to like the 17-year-old homies on the block, to the 67-year-old homies on the block, you know. But my mother does not have a political home. No one thinks of my mother as someone to organize with or to be in struggle with, you know. There aren't spaces really, you know, for her to that look at her as an organizer or as a leader or as a visionary that has a lot of lived experience around solidarity and how to really enact that on a day-to-day basis, you know. So again, and which to me is it's a lack of imagination on our part, you know, in terms of how we see each other and what we see as being possible and who can lead us there, you know.
I really appreciate what I'm hearing, like what I just heard from you, Loira, about just the political power and like talking to the folks in front of the bodega, right? And then I'm reminded of like Leah saying, okay, no, what I do is call and see if my people want to play Candy Crush, right? That we can sometimes overlook how important these just small little efforts to connect, because what we're really doing is like making meaning together and showing each other care, even in very small ways that matter.
Relationship, right? Like really, ultimately, this is about like prioritizing relationships over the action, over the campaign, over the do, over the task, you know? And we forget that so often. It's like such a basic like principle, like relationship before task, right? but we forget it often because we're in this rush, the urgency, the urgency, the urgency. And I think, collectively here, I think our call the invitation is like to slow down and connect and be really grounded and deliberate and intentional.
And I just want to add, so like mainstream world thinks of disability as like your body or your mind is broken, and either we fix you and you're good or you're just trash. And, as disabled people, of course, sometimes we need that pill or that treatment or that surgery for sure. But a lot of the time in disabled community, it really is people just witnessing each other and not trying to fix it or be like, oh, here's this magic cure. Just being like, it's okay for you to just be as you are and like welcome. And we'll just be there for each other and not abandon or forget about each other. And that's the bomb, and just the remembering, the like not being forgotten or left behind, which so many of us have been, the ways that we check on each other and we go, you good? And also, what are you thinking about? Like, what are you doing? Who are you talking to? Right? Like that is that invisibilized disabled femme, often Black or brown labor that, is not seen as like activism. And I'm like, that's what makes it all possible. That's what keeps us alive. Yep.
I love that. That's the BOMB, BOMB, and that's the BALM, BALM, right? We only have just a couple minutes left, but I want to see maybe, because this person is asking for some like practical tips. So can y'all speak to holding well-meaning people accountable to their ableism while simultaneously being enforced dependency on them in these times of COVID social unrest? I just wanted to kind of sneak that in before we run out of time to see if there are any offerings for this person.
Loira, did you want to go or?
No, I will go after you. I found the name of the union and I don't want to forget to share that with whoever asked.
I'm worried I'm not going to be able to get it all in 3 minutes because this is such a huge and crucial question. But I would say, we're masters at manipulating people into treating us like human beings, right? So I don't know the individual situation you're talking about. If it's an individual care provider, I think about everything from providing information, charming, being like, what does this person value? So let me speak to that and then be like, I need you to do this. I also really think about, I think it was Alice Walker who said, never be the only one of you in a room. And so often as disabled people, we are. So I think about reaching out and like being like, what's the local disabled, spoony, sick, mad peer support group? And being like, let me get my people together and let me see if I can get another care provider if this one sucks. Let me, on a bigger level, I think it is about like figuring out like the rules of the road where it's like, no, you're not allowed to abuse me. And I think the well-meaning thing is so hard because, everyone who's ableist is so well-meaning, they don't think they hate disabled people. I mean, sometimes they do. And I think that often we get those able-bodied tears when we go, that's really not acceptable. And they're like, but I'm just trying to help, And so I think that like, best, but I think that like sometimes it can be in a situation where you can speak to their best intentions and be like, okay, so if you really care, if you're well-intended, you can't do that anymore. And also here's some tools where you can learn how to do X, Y, and Z. Like here's best practices. Like, here's what I do. Here's what my boundaries are. Like, here's how you do this particular care thing in a good way. And then I think there's also power in some just saying, no, you can't do that anymore. Like full stop. Like, I'm not going to try and like seduce you into doing the right thing. There's a time to do that. And there's a time to like educate and build and work with. And there are also times where it's going to be hard no matter what, where there's a time to be like, I will not permit you to touch me that way or speak to me that way or use that word. I won't respond when you do that. I will refuse to do whatever. And I think that takes building in community to even get a little bit of support to be like, can I find other people who give me these care needs? I think so often we're in a place of scarcity where we're like, oh, it's that one person who kind of sucks, who will do this hard thing, the cleaning up my bodily fluids or making the bed. And it can be so hard when we're in it to be like, to start being creative and reaching out and finding the community. And also sometimes we have to invent that community is the hard part, right? Like so many times people were like, where's the disability justice group? And I'm like, everyone I knew of is one person who put out a post or a flyer or was like, hey, are you chronically ill? Do you want to come have brunch on my couch once a month and talk about your life? And things came out of that, even just like getting the mutual support of like, it's so painful when you're mistreated by your caregivers, right? Or when you face that ableism and you feel like you have no choice. So I think that's part of it. And on a meta level, so many of us are told every day that we're not desirable as friends, partners, people in community. So on the bigger, broader level, it's shifting communities that disabled people really are the hot shit, so that we're like, oh no, I don't have to just date you crappy person, who says these nasty things about my shower chair. Later, I've got my vibrator, B, I've got 20 other people who want to date me and think my shower chair is hot. That's a cultural change, right? Oh, I love that everyone's vibing this.
I just wanted to add really quickly for that question. Leah has wonderful books that have a lot of practical things. Find them, read them.
Thank you.
I have to shout out the No One is Disposable campaign. Look them up. No one is disposable. No body is disposable. It's a collective of people who have vital things specifically about surviving COVID, where they're like, make a little laminate with your picture and like, hi, I have a partner, I'm beloved. So that if you're in a hospital and you think there's a risk that people will just walk on by you because you're not a skinny, white, able-bodied person, there's a million tools they have about how to like just massage care systems that we're stuck inside to be treated better and to also complain.
I want to thank all of you, each of you, for this incredible conversation. Please, find their work, support their work. Y'all can go online and easily find all these folks, read their books, listen to their podcast episodes. I'm thinking specifically of Veralucia on La Cura podcast, incredibly brilliant. Just find their work, support their work. I hope everyone has an incredible AMC. And Loira, I want to make sure you have an opportunity to share the name of that union that folks asked about.
Yes, it is voice /C as in cat, S as in Sam, EA. And it is a union made up of and working for family care providers across New York State. And also, come watch the film tonight. The whole film is playing at Ethics and Aesthetics.
We'll see you at the film. We'll see you on the dance floor. Thank you, everyone. Happy AMC. Take care.